morning. I'm delighted to welcome all of you here this morning to the Ireland's permanent mission to the United Nations. And it's a particular honour for Ireland to host the African Europe Foundation's Women's Leaders Network event for the second year in a row. And it's a particular pleasure for us, given that our own distinguished former President, Mary Robinson, is the co-president of the Africa Europe Foundation. So I warmly welcome all of you, and particularly Mary. I'm also delighted to welcome Amina, Mohammed, Kristalina, Georgieva, and Dr. Ngozi. And welcome to all the other distinguished guests, and I see many friends of Ireland around the room. Your important deliberations this morning on COP28, and in particular the critical issue of climate and health, are timely. And I am particularly pleased that you will be discussing the importance of locally led adaptation, because this is a key priority for Ireland and one in which we are lobbying others in cooperation with Samantha Power in USA. We need to do much more and more urgently in respect of adaptation. Let me assure you of the priority that I attach to your work and to Ireland's climate obligations, including our international obligations. Again, particularly in the area of climate finance, to which we are attached, and we want to do more. I want to wish you fruitful, there's plenty of food on the table, fruitful deliberations, and to reiterate Ireland's ongoing support for your work to strengthen the Africa-Europe partnership, which is so crucial for all of us. Thank you very much indeed.
This is this one. Thank you very much, Tánaiste. Thank you very much, Micheál, for that warm greeting and for hosting for the second time through the Irish Mission our Women Leaders Network meeting. I'm very sorry that my co-chair, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, isn't able to be here this morning. She was with us last year. I'm going to be very brief. We know that we're really going to pick up on the context of the recent Nairobi conference, the G20, which was disappointing, the stock take, which shows that we're not on track. So, Amina, I'm going to hand over immediately to you. Just one point that to recall, this part of our meeting is live streamed, and the second part, which will focus more on climate and health, will be on the Chatham House rule. So, Amina, and then I will call on Kristalina and Ngozi.
Well, thank you so much, Mary. Thank you so much, Vanessa. This is always for us an annual touchstone that gets us started on the week, and the energy that comes from this room really important in the solidarity that we need to achieve ambitions, and that's really what the halfway mark is about. Yes. Data tells us it's a miserable outcome by any standards. We've failed, but there has been a lot of indications of where those successes could be and could come from. We have never been more equipped in the world to do the things that we need to, and I'm always looking into the text of outcome documents to see what can I harvest. And while I saw the G20 not good at all, I keep reminding everyone they did do the SDGs, they did do the means of implementation, and in of that is climate. And we must take it if we're going to say that there is a climate development nexus for it. There's an amazing amount of work, foundations laid on the means of implementation that Kristalina helped us to sow. They're still there. The RST is still there, the PRSGT is still there, the SDRs are still there. So we should really pull from them, implement them, and then get that going to scale up all the issues that we would like to address. We spent the weekend listening to stakeholders, and this was important because the UN was full from Saturday and Sunday, everyone telling us what their major issues are. And I think what we're getting out of this is that while it's a sober, there's a sober sort of take on where we are at halfway, everyone is enthused to walk out of this place more determined to get things done. And I think that's the hope that we have to give the rest of the world, is that it can be done, and we've got concrete things to do. We were talking about the climate health nexus. I think that, it's very important that we still have not got the whole of the sustainable development investment framing. We are still in our silos, we are still with our mandates, and the funding is difficult to get out of that. So anything that our donors can do to help do more pooled funding to get those joined up responses, the better we will be at this. But if we stay where we are, we're seeing in the field in every country that this is a huge challenge to civil society, to government, to the UN itself in trying to deal with the triple planetary crisis. It's getting more and more clear that there are investment transitions that need to happen at the arrowhead of this. We're saying the food systems, which will take the nutrition. We're talking about energy, the digital, education, the triple planetary crisis, and most importantly, that global, the social protection floor, which we think needs to be embedded somehow in the economy. There are a few countries that are taking this as a percentage of GDP, but more often than not, social cash transfers. There are things added on ad hoc. They're very reliant on money that's there or not there. We've got 3 health meetings this week, really important.
Yeah.
Sadly, the global geopolitical tensions, those geopolitical tensions, we're getting caught in the crossfire. As of last night, we do not have agreement on those 3 outcome documents. They're falling down on what we have, which is of course the universal coercive measures, that for in plain English is sanctions. And it also challenged the SDG outcome this morning, but we think we might have got a way through. It's just saying to you that we have a huge trust deficit. We have frustrations coming from Africa, for which this group has been really helpful. Every time it comes together, it tries to bridge that. If we can bottle all that with determination and come out of this, it would be good. But very specific issues that we want to take up. The universal health coverage, the One Health approach is working. We should dig even deeper, but health has, I think, in its prioritization, has fallen off the agenda, if I would say that. I mean, everywhere I go, it is climate, it is finance, but very little is said about health, and I think we need to get that back. And the One Health approach is a way to get that in, because it goes to the food systems, it goes to climate, it goes to everything. The pandemic accord, that's still a little way away, and on TB, I think it's a reminder that there are many health issues that if we don't follow through in health systems, they will come back and bite us. Yesterday, and this is personal to me because yesterday I remembered my father's death, and I lost him to TB. Now, 10 years, we thought we had solved it, and it came back. And when it came back with a vengeance, and it took 48 hours, and that was it. So it is very real, and the resurgence is here, and we need to take care of that. Let me just end by saying there's nothing stronger than a partnership when 2 regions come together. They reinforce the can-do, and they look at the challenges with the solutions to get over them. That's the spirit that we need right now, because it's too easy, and I do it all the time. The reality's not good, but there's a lot that we need to say is that glass that is some full. Let's actually talk about what's in it and how we can get to fill it by 2030. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amina, both I think for your hope and for your persistent determination in all the difficulties that you see. The elders are also very worried about the lack of commitment on health. We will be speaking about that, and we have strengths. And we now have a new elder, Helen Clark, has joined us. So we have Helen Clark, and we will be doing whatever we can as elders. But now, without delay, let me turn to Kristalina. Again, the context and leading to COP28. You have stood tall yourself. Please take the floor.
Thank you very much. I want to start from the status of our fight against climate change, and it is disturbing. We are so far from where we have to be. When we look at emission reduction by 2030, we have to be with 50% more than we currently have, and time is running short.
Yeah.
When you look at the incentive environment to decarbonize faster, we are not where we should be. We are still tolerating subsidies for fossil fuels, but most significantly, when you look below the tip of this iceberg, of the subsidies we see are the subsidies we don't see. Above all, not pricing carbon, as well as the health impacts of climate change. We are not capturing those, and they run in the trillions, not in the billions. So at the IMF, we work with our membership primarily to understand the macro criticality of climate change, how climate change affects economies, takes away from the well-being of people, and what can be done to both mitigate faster and to adapt to what is already happening. On the mitigation side, our most important contribution is in fiscal and monetary policies. Fiscal policies, we are a big proponent of pricing carbon through tax, trade, or regulatory measures. Predictable upward trajectory of carbon price is also desired by businesses. They want to know so they can adjust. And as we all know where we are today, average global price on carbon $5, where we should be by 2030, $75 at least. So we have work to do there. On the monetary policy side, we help countries look into the climate-related financial stability risks and be able to stress test their financial system for those risks to adjust. My second point today is on the role of women. We also
Hooray.
yes, we have adopted our we have adopted climate strategy, but we also have adopted gender strategy at the IMF. And we look thoroughly at what would do if women are more empowered. We actually looked into what happens when there is more gender balanced leadership in companies. Well, they reduce CO2 emissions by 5% more than those companies that don't have gender balanced leadership. We looked into what happens when parliaments have more women. Well, they adopt more stringent climate policies than parliaments that don't have women present. And in our own work, we have by now accelerated, including gender in our normal assessments of economic policy. We started by saying we were very modest, Mary. We said we would go with 11 countries.
Mm-hmm.
We have 22.
Uh-huh.
1/3 of them are in Africa. And of course, we are very keen to see more attention to the comprehensive impact of climate change, including on health. Now, people are dying because of heat waves. People are dying because a flood unleashes waterborne diseases. People are dying because mosquitoes return and then malaria expands. So we have to understand this impact to be able to fight it. I want to finish with one very important aspect of our work, and it is financing the fight against climate change. We have created, as Amina mentioned, the Resilience and Sustainability Trust. It is 40 billion strong. In one short year, we have gotten to 10 programs already. And what is very important, 5 of these programs are in sub-Saharan Africa. Why? Because this is the continent that has done nothing to create the climate crisis, but is more severely impacted. Therefore, resilience to climate shocks, building this resilience in Africa is so hugely important. So if we all do all we can win it.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Kristalina. I really liked, actually, the fact that you see the importance of women's leadership too. And I hope people will learn more about the Dandelion project. I've given you your Dandelion, which, and I'm going to give Ngozi one before she leaves. But before I turn to Ngozi, I think, Amina, you want to come back on the Climate Ambition Summit for now?
Yes, thank you, Kristalina. You jogged my memory there, because it's true, we're doing dreadfully on the climate. It's regressing so fast. We look like we'll get a COP28 that is fossil fuels and fossil fuels and fossil fuels. The Climate Ambition Summit that happens the day after tomorrow this is a struggle. And what we're trying to do is to create momentum to get into COP28. But we are dealing with 5 countries who have issued collectively more than 100 licenses to go out and do more fossil fuel. Now, in some of these countries, they've done really ambitious stuff on the renewables and the transitions, and we have to give them credit for that. But it's just going too bad on the other side, and mitigation. And so anything that we can do to really put the pressure from here to pre-COP to COP28 that this is not the future. It is sliding back. The countries are not able to come into that climate ambition space and say that this is what they've done. We're getting a few countries there, even business, the alliance will be there, but it's really not good. And these are countries who do not need to have any more licenses issued in their countries. Yeah. I'll just end by saying Africa's done more than many in adhering to all the targets we've set for Paris. The Africa Climate Summit showed that. It also showed that Africa was putting solutions on the table. But here's the another inequality. They're being held to higher standards than those in developed countries, and they're still trying to make the standards with women's leadership, with the mitigation, the transitions, everything that others should be doing. And I think that this is also where we need to say to the G20, 82% of the emissions are still with you, and that's what we need to deal with. Thank you.
Well, just to say, I actually addressed the march yesterday and marched together with Vanessa, whom I'll be calling on very shortly to speak, because I think the elders have to give every kind of leadership. But Ngozi, I was going to call on you, and I think, Georgina, you have to slip away.
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah, I hope you can stay because we're going to have a photo of you. Ngozi,
Yeah.
please, come beside me.
Yeah.
Good.
This is the seat of people who want to slip away.
Yeah, good.
Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you to the minister for being with us today, and great to see you, Mary Amina. I should commend Ireland also for the co-facilitation of the SDG summit and the whole process. So thank you for doing all of that and for hosting us this morning. I just want to take off a little bit. Amina made a comment that health is falling off the agenda. And I think it is because we're not surfacing adequately the linkage between health and climate. Yeah. There's a lot of sophisticated work done in journals by the medical profession, but popularly, we're not surfacing enough of that. There's a study that shows that there are 1,000 pathways through which climate can affect health. But the first point I want to make is if we want to hit on both climate and health, we need to do something to surface and publicize the linkages much more. Of course, as Kristalina was leaving, she's talked about the malaria-carrying mosquitoes now in Florida, which have not been seen in a decade. We have dengue-carrying mosquitoes in France. So things that we haven't seen before are surfacing everywhere. And I think that those threats should help us to make very clear the linkage between health and climate. That's on the one hand. And of course, the very obvious effects of what happens after a climate event, an earthquake or a flood, and how health is affected, that is very obvious. So I think there's a piece of work that we need to do to make better known these linkages if we're going to get the kind of interest we need. I think the second point I want to make is that what the study says, which is very nice, coordinated action. We cannot solve any of these problems unless we act at all levels and act together. That's a very important point. Community-based action, national action, but also global action and multilaterals working together. So we need to coordinate these actions. And of course, what we're all saying is we don't see enough of that. So the question we need to ask ourselves, how do we generate this action? How do we get the kind of coordination that is needed if we're going to tackle the problems of health and climate? And the third point I would like to make is has to do with the area in which I work. We have a lot on finance. We need finance for a just transition. We need to honor our pledges. We need trillions, and that is all true. But I think we should learn the lessons from the pandemic. During the pandemic, there was a time there wasn't finance, but we finally got it. But what happened? Developing countries were still left at the back of the queue for vaccines. But many people do not know why they were left at the back of the queue for vaccines. There was money. I was at Gavi when we made a contract for enough AstraZeneca for the African continent, but we never got it. Does anybody know why?
Racism?
Hmm?
I was going to say racism.
Racism? No, it's not racism. It's trade policy. The missing element in what we need to do is trade. People don't even think about it. The reason it took some time to make some vaccines is because there were export restrictions on inputs in the supply chain. So at one time, India couldn't get what it needed from the US to manufacture because of the Defense Production Act that stopped inputs. You know that vaccines, for instance, have a very long supply chain. 19 countries, 82 manufacturing sites for Yeah, Europe didn't. Europe was better. Some parts of Europe did, but I'll come to that. So the US at some point had import restrictions on that. We monitor it, so I know who imposed when. So we did. They didn't get the inputs. I will tell you about Ireland. We didn't get the inputs to India needed to manufacture. Were appeals to the US, and eventually they lifted. Then, when the AstraZeneca was manufactured in India, what happened? India put export restrictions. It was at the height of their pandemic. So I think politically, even though they didn't need all of that, to be seen to be allowing vaccines to leave to another place when you had at the height of the epidemic didn't look politically good. So they put export restrictions and we couldn't get the vaccines. So in November, I had to fly to Delhi. I spoke to Prime Minister Modi to help us by releasing these vaccines. So what am I trying to say? We focus on money, that's great. But there are non-financial factors in that we need to pay attention to. Otherwise, we might have all the money in the world and we'll still be stuck. And that is where trade comes in. So if we're to solve the problems of health and climate, we also need to pay attention to where trade policies can be harmful and where they can be helpful. So we've learned the lessons from the pandemic. As we monitor supply chains, what our members we're urging them to do is one, to make sure that there's free flow of trade. Without that, we cannot deal with the health impacts of climate. We can't even deal with adaptation and mitigation itself if we're not able to have a free flow of technologies, renewables, and all other goods for those who can manufacture, but also for those who need to use them to make a just transition. So the biggest help you can give and you should focus on is insisting on predictable, open, and fair trade to allow goods to flow and to allow ideas and technology to flow. And I want to end by talking about our intellectual property agreement, the TRIPS agreement, which was seen as a villain during much of the COVID-19. And then we were able to get some more flexibilities out of the agreement so that we could allow developing countries to override the patents to be able to manufacture. What we are looking at, we actually have a very good relationship in Geneva, tripartite or trilateral, we call it, between WHO, WTO, and WIPO. We're looking ahead. We're looking at these problems, the type you surfaced in your study, to say, how should we position? What do we need to do to help developing countries weather this weather the problems that are coming in the longer term? And how do we make sure that we don't have disruptions in supply chains to enable these countries deal with both the health and the climate-related impacts? And what we are seeing and working on is that many of them are not at all positioned to make use of the TRIPS agreement as it is now. There are some flexibilities in it, but they don't have the legislative framework like that, like is the case in many developed countries. So we're trying, and the human resources and capacity to be able to make use of this. This is really very important because if we have an outbreak, they're still not in a position to manufacture or avail themselves of the help that they need. So we're working together, these three organizations, to try and see how we can help developing countries develop the legislative framework that will enable them. But the urgency is no longer there.
Yeah.
Eyes have moved away, and we need to resurface that urgency.
Yeah.
So those are the points that I'd like to make.
Thank you very much, Ngozi. As always, you bring a very important dimension, which frankly, I don't hear enough in the climate space. The importance of factoring in trade rules and the trade position, but also your point on the TRIPS agreement and the lack of, both of you have talked about the lack of urgency on health. The elders are very concerned about this. It's a real problem. We're going to hear from Vanessa Kerry after Vanessa, who marched with me, Vanessa Nakate. But I'm afraid, in the interest of having a photograph, we have to have it now. So can we rise and move, I think, over there rapidly, and we'll have a group photo, and then we'll resume with those who can stay with us. Okay.
I can stay a little
Good,
bit more.
good, excellent. Please do. Yeah. I have to say, one of the wonderful things about this meeting is the way we all energize each other. The way people greet and are delighted to see each other. And I really welcome that there's such a good turnout and so many friends here. And that's part of why this Women Leaders Network is a very good start to this UNGA week. And we're now in the second part, but I'm going to call first on what I call the two Vanessas. The Vanessa Nakate, who spoke at the march as I did yesterday, and then we walked together for as long as an elder can walk in a march, which wasn't quite as long. And Vanessa, over to you.
Thank you very
Your
much.
mic. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. I'm so happy to be in this place today. I always say that every new birth is as a result of an old womb, and it means that if I am able to stand in certain places, it's because those who went before me stood. If I'm able to be in certain rooms, it's because those who went before me believed that someone like me could also be in those rooms. So I would like to first of all appreciate the work that you're all doing as our elders in this space. So please clap for yourself. Yes, so I am a climate activist from Uganda, and I work with Rise Up Movement and TED Foundation. I've been organizing with Fridays for Future as well since 2019. So it's been a while in the movement, I should say, and I didn't realize how long this would take. When I started activism, I thought it would be for a couple of months, but then as I continued going to the streets and going to schools to carry out climate education, I just realized how hard it was to stop and how it was such an important fight, especially when you see communities that are on the front lines of climate change. I've been able to visit some of these communities with UNICEF, specifically in the Horn of Africa. I've visited places like Turkana, and I've always said how climate change is more than weather, how it's more than statistics, how it's more than numbers, and it's about the people. But when I went to Turkana, I had a full understanding of what those words really meant. because I got to see how people were being impacted by this drought, and especially children, especially mothers, because from the the places that we visited, we got to learn that the fathers had left their homes with the animals to look for pasture and water for the animals. So many of the women and their children were left alone, and the stories were quite devastating. And it also helped me see the connection of climate and health, because in a way, climate change doesn't stand on its own, and it shows that we don't live single issue lives. Climate change affects almost every sector of our lives, and that includes health. Because from that trip, I got to understand that there is a connection of malnutrition with climate change, because if climate change exacerbates droughts and families have failed harvests and there is no enough food, it means many mothers they are going to give birth to children when there is no enough food. Even during their time of pregnancy, they don't have enough to eat. So it's like children are already given birth to when they're already suffering from malnutrition. And I got to see children who are receiving treatment, but I also got to see children in the worst cases of severe acute malnutrition. And I remember one of those children actually died that evening after we had visited him. So I think that visit made me really understand how climate change is more than statistics, and it's bigger than any numbers that we could talk about. When we see how the statistics are talking about the thousands of people that are that have died, for example, in Libya, it's very possible to read 5,000 people and then not really think about how that in my country, most of the schools, especially secondary schools, they're about 1,000 students. So if you are to count 5,000 people that have been killed, for example, because of floods, those are 5 whole schools. So I think many times when we read the numbers, we don't really see how big it is. But when you actually think about how, if you're to count one individual, you realize how much of an impact climate change is. And that is why my work has been around raising awareness about the impacts of climate change, and also raising awareness about the need to address the elephant in the room, the one that is greatly responsible for the climate crisis, and that is fossil fuels. And I had the opportunity to be a part of the march to end fossil fuels yesterday, calling upon developed countries, especially the United States, to be the climate leaders that they need to be, and to address the climate crisis. Because if we are to talk about the need to address climate adaptation, loss and damage, we also need to talk about the root cause. Because when you find yourself in the ditch, the first thing to do is to stop digging. You don't continue digging and then figure out how to get out of the ditch. And that's how I see the crisis that we are in. Is we need to close the tap, and we need to bring in renewables, and we need to address the energy poverty in countries in the global south, especially in the African continent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. And thank you for your kind acknowledgement of the role of elders before you. But in particular, I think you've brought us into what is the heart of our discussion now, the nexus between climate and health. You spoke so eloquently about that, and now I'm going to ask Vanessa Kerry, to give us a short essence of the report, which has been circulated, which I hope most of us have read, but just, and then I'm going to call on Vanina Laurent Ledru to follow you from Foundation S. And then it will be an open discussion for whoever. And the best thing to do when it's open discussion, so I can see, is put up your flag like this, and I'll be very happy to call you. So, Vanessa Kerry.
Thank you very much for letting me join this morning. And just for background, I'm a physician by training, and I run a nonprofit that builds healthcare capacity by partnering governments in sub-Saharan Africa to train workforce. And I was recently appointed the WHO Special Envoy for Climate Change and Health out of recognition of the fact that the work that we've been doing in training the workforce, we realize that we already have a shortage of workforce, but we are facing a bigger and bigger crisis because of what we're seeing in climate change. And we work in places like Malawi that has seen the largest and longest cholera outbreak it's ever seen because of tropical storms that pass not once over southern Africa, but go out to sea, return, put huge amounts of rain into, and affect the disease patterns, wash out bridges so women can't deliver, and we have to stand up new birthing units. So as our work got harder, we realized that we're not ready for the pandemic that is coming from climate change in terms of the health issues. And it's everything. It's NCDs, it is vector-borne diseases, it is maternal health, it is mental health, it is direct trauma. And I want to just share a quick story before I talk a little bit more about the report. I'm also a mother, probably my most important role. I have 2 small children, and I was putting my daughter to bed about 5 days ago, and she said, "Mommy, I can't sleep." And I said, "Why not?" She goes, "Because the Earth's going to end, and I'm scared." And I said, "Okay, you want to talk about that?" She said, "No, I don't, actually. I'm too scared to talk about it." I said, "Well, do you want to write it out so you at least get it out of your system?" She said, "Sure, I'll write it down." So she wrote it down, and then she crossed it out, and she asked me to burn it so her thoughts would go away. I said, "No, okay, I'll figure out how to do that, but sure." The thing that was striking to me, though, is like, as a mother, yes, I'm terrified that my daughter's having these thoughts, but my daughter is falling asleep safe in her bed with her stuffed animals, totally fine. And this was basically the same day that 20,000 people went missing in Libya because of torrential downpour, a failure to invest in infrastructure. And there's a mother that is not putting her child to bed in Libya, not because her child is dead, but because she is dead, because her entire family is dead. And the reality of what we are facing is not just our health and well-being and the fact that climate change is killing us daily. This is justice. This is a cycle of poverty and inequity. This is gender equity. This is a fundamental question of the values that we live, the system we're going to go by. And I don't want to just make this a doom and gloom, because I actually think there's immense possibility. This room is full of power and opportunity. This city is full of power and opportunity, especially this week. And the question becomes, what are we going to do about it? A colleague of mine pointed out recently that we shouldn't be talking about whether we're on track for 1.5 versus 2.4, 2.6. We should be counting this in terms of the lives lost, not the degrees Celsius. And that's exactly what we need to be doing in this moment. So I think there's 3 really critical things, and I think the report covers, a lot of this as we get into it. And everyone has a copy, so I encourage you to take a look. But I think the first thing that we have to realize is that climate and health is actually every single sector that we look at. It's our economic growth, it's a household's ability to survive and thrive and not fall into poverty. It is our security, it is migration. 1.2 billion people are going to be climate refugees by 2050. It is our mental health, it is our gender equity. Women are getting sexually assaulted in Kenya as they walk farther and farther for water. And we're losing progress on HIV now, and we're perpetuating old cycles of abuse. So we have the ability to have a win-win if we intervene with a climate and a health-centered approach to climate change. Secondly, we do what we measure, and what we measure is often guided by the wrong metrics, and we have to start to think about not fast and quick wins, but how do we measure qualitatively for our well-being? And that's where I think women matter, because we also need a new kind of leadership right now. A courageous, compassionate leadership that is going to prioritize the right things. And so my call to action is to think about how we can transform from expedient and poor choices that are about quick wins, victory, and ego, to being about long-term compassion and security and well-being. And I think that I'm grateful for having been part of the Collective Minds, which is the Foundation S group that wanted to think about how do we create a response to climate and health in this moment, and how do we transform what the conversation looks like. And so what they really outlined is a report that creates the call to action around a health-centered approach to climate change that focuses very much on mobilizing more financing. We just fundamentally have to unlock some of the financing that exists in the world. It's being held by increasingly small, number of hands. And how do we unlock that and get smart and build blended financing and catalytic financing and bring together public-private partnership to be transformative for this moment and to really respond? Because it turns out if you invest in health, it's savings, not a cost. The return on investment is about $2 to $4 for every dollar invested in health. Secondly, communities. Flexible funding into the communities in a context where the funding is, can be best utilized and most rapidly utilized in a really dynamic way where the solutions are already found. I mean, communities have been adapting to climate change for years. The problem is now it's accelerating faster and out of reach to the resources available. So we need to help close that gap so that these communities and those that are most vulnerable and on the front line are not as vulnerable. I recognize that Vanessa's going to speak about this as well, so I might allow you to continue on the report rather than because I've been talking a lot. But just to say that I think the question becomes, how do we take these smart recommendations and how do we start to transform the world that we live in? Because it has to happen now, and there's no such thing as too ambitious for this moment. I think that's what we need to strive to do. So it's been a pleasure to think from a public health hat with a private foundation hat about how we can take this moment. But I'd love for you to also.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. And before I pass on to Vanina, because you've stimulated me. In fact, there's been a lot of reference, Kristalina did it very strongly, to women's leadership. And actually, I'm involved with a number of connected women leaders in what we call Project Dandelion. And I have some cards and just a few badges about it. I'm wearing a badge myself. The dandelion is our symbol because it is the only flower-stroke weed that grows on all 7 continents. It's very resilient. You can't get rid of it if you want to. It's also very regenerative because it has deep roots for the soil. And you can eat every part or drink every part of the dandelion. And the roots even are good for taking toxins out of the body, apparently, which is interesting. And then how do you share it? Children blow the dandelion seed. And we feel we need some way to connect the various movements, like Vanessa's movement, like Fridays for Future, like Indigenous peoples in particular have been there from the beginning, and all of that. So we want to reach out to more women leaders who say climate is not my thing. And our message is climate is everybody's thing now. And you have to understand that keep on doing what you're doing on violence against women or girls' education or whatever it is, but climate is your thing. And we have to extend in that way. But we also hope that the dandelion could become a kind of symbol that links all of our movements in an urgency of now, the fierce urgency of now, to pressure, particularly democratic governments. They don't feel enough pressure yet to take the hard decisions, and they want to get re-elected. So it doesn't work. We're not on course. I mean, the stocktake was very depressing in that regard. We also, of course, need the big emitters, the Chinas and Indias and that. But we need leadership to get out of fossil fuel with just transition as quickly as possible. So I'm happy to share more information about Project Dandelion with anyone, and I see people like Hindu over there, who's a champion of our of Project Dandelion. But let's go back to health and climate, that nexus. So Vanina, and then the floor is open. I'm waiting for people to put up their yes, okay.